SpaceX Dragon, we're go for launch. Let's light this candle.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff.
Roger, liftoff and the clock is started.
The shuttle has cleared the tower.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Houston now controlling the flight of Atlantis. The space shuttle spreads its wings one final time for the start of a sentimental journey into history.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Oh, that looks beautiful.
Welcome back to a brand new episode of Raptors and Dragons, and this week we will be covering some past launches, some future launches, some Boca Chica developments, some breaking space industry news, all things NASA, and finally some international news. Starting off this week, we saw the launch of Starlink, launch 27 on May 9th. This was the 10th flight of this booster, B1051, which flew Demo 1, which is the debut of the Dragon 2.0 vehicle, radar set, SXM-7, and 7 Starlink launches. This booster set a new reuse record for SpaceX, making their first double-digit booster recovery.
Next, we saw Rocket Lab's Electron rocket, making this their 20th launch, launching the Running Out of Toes mission, carrying 2 Earth observation satellites for Black Sky's global monitoring constellation. However, shortly before stage 2 ignition, the rocket experienced an anomaly, which resulted in the loss of the mission. Rocket Lab is also inspecting the recovered first stage booster, which returned to Earth and splashed down softly under parachutes in the Pacific Ocean for clues of what could have happened during the mishap.
On May 15th, we saw the launch of yet another Starlink mission, this one being mission 26, with booster B1058 making a successful landing on the Of Course I Still Love You drone ship. Deploying 52 Starlink satellites, a Capella synthetic aperture radar spacecraft, and a TIVAC 0130 optical spectrum astronomy observation satellite. This was Flight 8 for this booster, previously taking Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley to the ISS. Anasis 2, CRS-21 with the debut of the new Cargo Dragon, which looks the same on the outside, yet more room on the inside for cargo. Transporter 1 and 4 Starlink satellites.
United Launch Alliance made a successful launch on May 18th with the launch of SBIRS GEO-5, riding on their flagship Atlas V rocket, carrying the space-based infrared system, which is a collection of satellites in geostationary, Earth orbit, and highly elliptical Earth orbit, which provide early missile warning and defense capabilities for the U.S. Space Force's Space and Missile Systems Center. And now we look forward to this week's upcoming launches.
Currently scheduled for May 26th, Starlink Mission 28 will lift off from SLC-40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station around 3 p.m. Eastern, with plans aiming at a booster landing on the Of Course I Still Love You drone ship and a fairing recovery by Shelia Bordelon. This is flight number 2 for this booster, supporting Sentinel 6A mission, which was out of Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, which was on November 21st, 2020.
On the international side, we are expecting to see OneWeb 7 launch aboard a Soyuz from the Vostochny Cosmodrome, taking 36 OneWeb internet satellites into a polar orbit. Despite Soyuz being a Russian rocket, the launch provider is still Arianespace, with Ariane providing subcontracting through Roscosmos to launch a Soyuz on their behalf. Now over to Jake with this week's Boca Chica news and Starship developments.
Starship has been on the idle side since the Starship SN-15 landing, other than moving it back to the suborbital pad and lifting it up onto Pad B, as well as releasing the SN-12 nose cone from the test structure, examining the following max Q load test on the nose cone, simulating the pressure that it'll face during that stage of flight. Nose cones for future Starship models are in the works, and SN-16 is still patiently waiting in the high bay. Another suborbital test flight is planned for later this month, but which vehicle they will use is unknown since they have 2 starships that they can test, which could be SN-15 making a second flight or the debut of SN-16. Also, we have recently seen the construction of a special sign outside of the production site. SpaceX has been given a detailed report on their flight profile for the first orbital launch. After liftoff, a Super Heavy booster will fly Starship around 169 seconds into flight, where it will separate from the Starship vehicle. It will then return into the Gulf of Mexico to either the oil rig that SpaceX has been working on or make a soft water landing. Starship continuing to orbit and flying just short of one orbit as it re-enters the Pacific Ocean making a soft ocean landing around 90 minutes into flight. Until the FAA can assure that Starship and Super Heavy pass the environmental assessment or can make corrections to mitigate impacts, SpaceX will just have to stay suborbital. Back to Mason for some breaking space industry news.
Boeing's work with NASA has prepared their Skyliner capsule for its next flight, which is currently scheduled for July 30th. Riding atop an Atlas V, the capsule will reach the International Space Station by night on the 31st. This comes after NASA and Boeing completed the integrated mission dress rehearsal, testing all of the flight software using a simulator at the Boeing flight facility in Houston. Lasting 5 days, the simulation included the highest fidelity hardware and mission controllers to simulate as close to an actual flight as possible. Virgin Galactic hopes to have corrected the problem that aborted the last powered test flight in December 2020, pinpointing the problem to the electromagnetic interference that was caused by a new flight control computer on the vehicle that triggered a failsafe aboard, with the next flight happening possibly as soon as the end of this month. Ever want to be an astronaut? Well, Orbite has you covered with their new astronaut orientation program. This 3-day, 4-night program will include classroom training, astronaut food tasting, and flights in microgravity. As Orbite's co-founder Jason Andrews said, "It really is, as we say, training people mentally, physically, and spiritually for what is truly a bucket list experience." Currently, the program is priced at $29,500 per person. Starting in France, they hope to eventually move their complex to Orlando, Florida in 2023 and 2024.
Former shuttle astronaut and longtime head of Kennedy Space Center, Bob Cabana, will become the next NASA Associate Administrator. This comes after current NASA Associate Administrator Steve Jurczyk announced that he will be retiring from NASA after 36 years in the agency. Cabana was a U.S. Navy test pilot who joined NASA in 1985. He flew on 4 shuttle missions from 1990 through 1998, and later becoming Deputy Director of the Johnson Space Center and Director of the Stennis Space Center, before being put in charge of Kennedy Space Center in 2008. Cabana has been attributed with the leading transformation of Kennedy Space Center after the retirement of Space Shuttle in 2011, converting the center into a multi-user spaceport, home to Blue Origin, Boeing, and SpaceX.
Virgin Orbit has announced that they will be making their next Launcher 1 mission in June of this year. The rocket will be carrying defense and commercial CubeSat satellites. This announcement was the latest in a series of developments Virgin Orbit as it seeks to fall into a regular operations cadence with the Launcher 1 system, which uses a modified Boeing 747 as its launch platform. And finally, to wrap up today's episode, some international space news. Arianespace could delay the launch of James Webb Space Telescope after off-nominal fairing separations on the past 2 launches of their Ariane 5 rocket. The fairing deploys are within acceptable limits, but with the importance of the James Webb Space Telescope mission, they are not willing to take these chances.
Earlier this week, China made its first planetary landing attempt as it landed the 240-kilogram Zhurong rover in the southern Utopia Planitia on Mars. After some preliminary tests, the rover will make a panoramic photo of the landing area, then go down its landing platform to the Martian soil that lies below, beginning its initial 90-day mission to explore and analyze the local area, climate, magnetic field, and subsurface. Now back to Mason to end out the podcast this week. But before we do that, I want to show you guys a very nice video that SpaceX has created for the Crew 1 mission.
You know, it feels great to be a part of this transition from a test program, a demonstration program, to an operational program.
After NASA certified Crew Dragon, Crew 1 is the first mission to the International Space Station. I feel very honored to be a part of this great mission.
When we're sitting on the launch pad, I think what's going to be going through my mind is I want to be in the moment and enjoy the experience.
There is just an electricity in the air as that countdown is happening. The engines light and liftoff occurs.
3, 2, 1. Ignition. Liftoff.
Vehicles pitching downrange. Falcon 9 is supersonic.
Stage separation confirmed.
Dragon separation confirmed.
Dragon SpaceX trajectory nominal.
It's really hard to explain living and working in zero-G. It's fascinating how normal it becomes. It just feels like you've done it your whole life.
The only purpose of every spacecraft is to bring astronauts to space and bring them back safe.
You know, sometimes you have to leave something to understand how special it is. Getting the opportunity to go to space kind of gives you that same feeling about our home planet.
Thank you so much for listening to our third episode of the Raptors and Dragons podcast. We really hope you've enjoyed this week's launch news and exciting breakthroughs. We'd love to hear your feedback in the comments below, so make sure you put it down there. We'll be making sure to read all the comments. Remember to like and subscribe, and as always, from our home to yours, we are Go for Launch. We'll see you next time, fellow space nerds and Texas Tank Watchers.